1517 presents our 2024 free Advent resources entitled, His Gospel is Peace, the Advent of Christ and the End of Fear. This will include an Advent and Christmas sermon series for pastors to use midweek or on Sundays, along with other helpful resources for congregations. We've also created a personal devotional for every day of the 2024 Advent season, written by 1517 contributors. His Gospel is Peace is available as a free download. Sign up today to get access.
Welcome to 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. 40 Minutes in the Old Testament is a 1517 podcast network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast and check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. Of course, don't register for Here We Still Stand because it's sold out, but you are already here. So congratulations on that. Glad that you are here. We are going to look over Psalm 46. Some time ago, Chad and I were like, hey, we're going to start doing 2 episodes a week and we're going to release Psalms. And we haven't done that very well because it's just a lot. I have a lot of podcasts to edit, and so that's going to kick back up. But we're going to knock one out today. So when we get to this one, Chad, we'll just skip on by, and then receive a lot of emails about why'd you skip that podcast, and then have to reply to those emails about it's this live recording. Go look at it. So Psalm 46, Chad. What are we looking at?
Well, we're looking at. So I chose this one for a number of reasons. Number one, maybe not number one, but close to number one, is because what hymn is in the background of Psalm 46? I mean, what hymn was inspired by Psalm 46?
Mighty Fortress.
Yeah. And there's a few Lutherans in the room, right? And even if you're not a Lutheran, you probably know a Mighty Fortress. So I thought, number one, it's a 1570 conference.
Yeah.
Psalm 46. I mean, it just makes sense. And number two, this conference is about the church. And Psalm 46 has a lot to say about life in the church. So that's the 2 reasons I suggested this one. Plus, it's just a cool psalm.
Yeah.
So we're gonna dive into it. It's not very long. It's only 11 verses. You think we can fill up 40 minutes with 11 verses? Can we pull that off?
We've done it in the past.
Done it in the past. We can do it again. So this is, if you know about the Psalms, the book of Psalms, you know that there's 5 different parts to it, just like the books of the Torah. So this is in the second book. And like a lot of these Psalms, at least the beginning of Book 2, it is by the sons of Korah. So that's kind of in the clump of Psalms that it's part of. And then it says it is according to Alamot, and Dan's going to explain what that means.
Dan, go for it.
Yeah.
Well, it's like if you had a psalm but you wanted ice cream on top of it.
Yeah. I knew you were going there, dude.
It's when you read it, when you sing a psalm, but you also eat ice cream.
Yes.
That's a psalm a la mode.
Yeah.
That's what I think that is.
It's actually the ancient Hebrew meaning of that word. It's connected with ice cream. Now, nobody knows what that means. It's just a word that at one point meant something to the people who put this together. It's a musical notation. So that's all we're going to say about that. But that's all in the heading. I'm going to read through the psalm itself, beginning with the first verse. And then we'll go back and we'll pull it apart, see what we can learn about the church and especially about Christ. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, and though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice. The earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear and burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And I don't know if there's anything else we need to say.
Selah.
And that's it. Selah. There you go.
Selah.
No, a well-known psalm. Of course, most people know at least, I'd say, half of the psalms. You kind of recognize it. This one is certainly well-known, and for good reasons, because it's full of memorable images. Mm-hmm. It's certainly full of very gracious promises. And like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, it has found its way into our hymnody through a mighty fortress. So it starts out here with God, which is always a good place to begin. Mm-hmm. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I did do a little bit of math. Math is not my strong suit, but I can count. I can still do that. And guess how many occurrences of God are in this psalm? Of course. Yeah. I don't know if you knew that, if you just guessed, but 7.
Good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Obviously, you got to have 7 references to God in here. But that's the way it starts out. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. The Hebrew is kind of weird there. So it's like a helper in times of trouble, he is found to be greatly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it can be even in the sense of he's a well-proven. He's got a track record of being a refuge and a source of strength to us in times of trouble.
That's good news.
That is good news.
Yeah.
It is very good news. Because I don't know about all of you, but I've had times of trouble in my life. I mean, probably most of you have not experienced that. But if it ever comes along, let me guarantee you that if you're looking for a refuge and strength in those times of trouble, then God is always going to be there during those times of trial and struggle.
Yeah, I love the constancy of the language here because it indicates that, number one, we are always going to have times of trouble in this life, and yet throughout all those times of trouble, he is with us. Mm-hmm. And he will never leave us nor forsake us, to dip into the New Testament a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the image behind the Hebrew word that occurs a lot of times, in the Psalms especially, but other places too. It's the idea of, it's kind of like our word stress or distress. It's the idea you're kind of being pressured. The walls are closing in, you're in a narrow space. And that's kind of the image behind this Hebrew word for trouble, which I like because, we all experience this. The ceiling's coming down, the walls are closing in, we don't know where to turn. So where do you go when you're stressed, when you're compressed, when you're distressed, when you're in this narrow place? Well, it turns out there is a source of refuge and strength for us, and it's always God during those times.
And this isn't just when trouble is brought to us by other people, but this also applies when we might be the source of our own trouble as well.
Yeah. Like
He's
it often
faithful
is
even
in
when
Dan's
we're faithless.
life. Yeah, like it often is in Dan's life.
Yeah, like it often is in the life of Israel.
That's for sure.
Yes, this is true.
I do think that it's good that if something is well proven to be true, it should go without saying. So you just know this. But what is also true is that, so I kind of read this way where you have the psalmist say, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help or well-proven help in times of trouble. In times of trouble, you will try first and foremost to find help somewhere else. You'll try to find a refuge somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And he starts this psalm, I think, by reminding that there is someone who has proven themselves to be the place that you go in times of trouble, even though it's not the first place you think of going. Sometimes it's the last place. It's the last, after you've exhausted everything else. I guess I'll go with God on this. And I think that's part of what he's doing here. Is there's this calling to remembrance that God has proven himself over and over again to be the safest place for you in times of trouble.
This is the way so many
go
of the
there
Psalms
first.
are, too. So many of the Psalms are calling the people to remember the good deeds of God on their behalf.
Yeah.
Constantly going back. Remember what he's done. Remember. Mm-hmm. That's still true.
Well, if you have the people of Israel and they're in times of trouble, they might be trying all kinds of different things like we might do to try to fix it or to solve these problems or to deliver ourselves. And it seems like he's saying, hey, just remember who we are, and who we are people who have God as our refuge and our strength. And you need to remember that as we go through times of trouble.
Yeah. And the times of trouble here are described as the verses go on to, these are kind of cataclysmic kind of events that are described here. So this is, our very present help in times of trouble, like when we get a cold. So this is not what he's talking about. Because we go on to verse 2, therefore, first of all, we're not going to be afraid. We will not fear. Even though, and here we have this cataclysmic events described. The earth is giving way, hurricanes, like Flame was talking about. The mountains are moved into the heart of the sea. Its waters are roaring and foaming, and the mountains are trembling at its swelling. This is some crazy stuff that's going on. Now, there's a couple different ways we can read this. Number one, we can read this as simply kind of, and this is typical of the Psalms, actually typical of the Old Testament, where you take something and you make it hyperbolic. You exaggerate it in order to create the impression of things are really falling apart, either the nation of Israel or your own life or whatever it might be. So you often will have hyperbolic, exaggerated language in the Psalms. That's characteristic of poetry in general. And that might be part of what's going on here. So even though, creation itself is coming undone, we're not going to be afraid. So that might be going on. But there's another pretty strong argument that the way the psalm works is, it first of all says, okay, God's our source of refuge and strength, so don't be afraid. Even though A happens, and A is described in the language of creation, with mountains and seas especially. Stability and chaos. Kind of pride and disorderliness. You have the mountains and seas kind of representing those two extremes. So it's described that way. But then, after a couple more verses, down in verse 6 and 7, you have the nations brought in. Mm-hmm. And here is where your translations, God love them, can sometimes not do the best job because they'll switch words in English, which in Hebrew are exactly the same. So just kind of jump ahead. When it says that though the mountains be moved and though its waters roar. Now, the word for roar, its waters roaring, is the same word that's used in verse 6 for the nations raging. Same Hebrew word. So the waters are roaring in verse 3. The nations are raging in verse 6. Obviously different English words, same Hebrew word. And then this idea of the mountains being moved into the heart of the sea, that's translated as totter in verse 6, where the kingdoms totter. So we have the same two Hebrew words occurring in verses 2 and 3, and then in 5 and 6 to describe the seas and the mountains, and then the peoples or the nations. They're translated differently, but obviously, when the sons of Korah wrote this song, they wanted us to connect these things together, and they want us to connect them because all throughout the Old Testament, the seas raging and all the chaos of the waters or the storms, that is emblematic of the non-Israelite world. So the Israelites saw themselves as those who are on stable ground, and the seas were the emblems of the nations, where God isn't ruling, where there's just chaos, where everything is like Genesis 1:2, tohu vavohu, where it's formlessness and void. Mm-hmm. So either you have, or maybe both of these, where you have creation coming undone, and then the nations also coming undone, or creation coming undone is actually just a poetic way of describing what's happening among the nations. Either way, whether you go A, B, or it's all describing the same thing, what's happening from the Israelite perspective all around them is everything is falling apart.
Yep.
There's threats galore, turbulence, danger, everything based upon what you see and experience indicates that, man, I don't know where to turn because everywhere I look, things are falling apart. And that's when the good news comes in.
Yeah. This reminds me, the imagery here reminds me a lot of the book of Revelation, obviously, because you have all this cataclysmic imagery that used there. Mm-hmm. And it also reminds me of the fact that this kind of thing actually does happen periodically throughout history all the time. There has been volcanoes that have caused the whole world around them to just kind of fall apart. I mean, where for years crops won't grow and people are dying of famine and all sorts of things. This has happened all throughout history. And of course, when we look at the history of the Old Testament, we know that the nations were always roaring and the kingdoms were tottering, and that this was a constant problem for the people of God. And it still is true for us today. I mean, we don't have any reason to believe or be certain that everything is going to be fine even later today. Yeah. It's not guaranteed to us. And so really, the times of trouble are all the times. Mm-hmm. And God is our very present help now, and he's our very present help even if the world starts to explode. He's always there.
Yeah. And therefore, we will not fear.
Yeah.
Because we know that no matter how much instability there is out there, whether it's in our own personal lives or our family lives or congregational lives or our national lives or just the life of creation in general, one thing that's always stable, the one thing that never changes, is not just who God is in his existence, but who he is for you. So God never wakes up in the morning and has to decide whether he's going to love you or not. Mm-hmm. It's constant. He never finishes the day regretting that he loves you and forgives you. That's the constant that's there, is that when he sees you, there's never a bit of hesitation as to whether he's for you or not. That's just part of his very nature in Christ, is that he's always on your side. He's always for you. He always loves you. He's always ready and willing and joyful to forgive you. So that stability is the only rock that is strong enough to build our lives, because we know that it's always going to be there for us.
I think too with fear, sometimes when I read in the Old Testament or New, and you hear this don't be afraid. I mean, Jesus says it all the time, don't be afraid, and you're like, okay. Mm-hmm. Or don't be anxious, and you're like, thanks.
Solved. Yeah.
Since if you say so, and this happens in the Psalms and stuff too, and you have this so we have this very well proven help in times of trouble, and so therefore we're not going to be afraid. But I think that you could take that and be like, okay, well, I am a little bit afraid, or I do get afraid. I think it's more like if so years ago, we had a tornado that was. Well, we had one recently too, but this story is from years ago. We had tornadoes, and we lost power and stuff, and my daughter was afraid. I was a little bit afraid, but not as much afraid. I had been through these before, and we lost power, and I was taking her out of her room, we were gonna all go into the living room, and I told her, "Don't be afraid." I was like, "Don't be afraid." Now, sometimes when you tell someone, therefore we will not be afraid, or there's nothing to be afraid of, you're acknowledging the fear that is there, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm telling her, hey, I got you. Don't be afraid, because I'm with you. So you know me, I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you, so you don't need to be afraid. And and the Psalms do this a lot too, I think, where they're acknowledging that the fear is there, and instead it's not saying and if you're afraid, therefore you don't believe. This is evidence. It's more that because you do have this well-proven help in times of trouble, there's something you can look to in times of fear that is not so much going to make you altogether not afraid, but actually acknowledges that the fear is a real thing. But when you are afraid, that this is what you look to, right? Not simply that, hey, we have God, therefore don't be afraid of anything. It's not that. It's you have God, so when you are afraid, look to him.
Yeah. And then, so...
That's 18 minutes, though, and we've only gone through 3 verses.
We're doing good.
You might want to start moving.
Progress. So I've always loved this transition between verse 3 and 4, because given everything we've talked about with mountains falling into the heart of sea and everything roaring and foaming and seemingly falling apart, the transition to what comes next is not what you would expect.
Yeah.
Because we go from these roaring seas and mountains tumbling and all of that to talking about a little river.
Yeah.
There is a river. This is our source of our hope. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. And of course, the holy habitation of the Most High, every Israelite knew that was on a mountain, right? That's where God's at. So you have mountains falling apart in the opening of this, and you have oceans and seas and all of this, and then we transition. What's our hope found on? Where do we turn in times of fear? Well, there's a river, and it makes us very happy, makes us joyful, because it's connected with the holy habitation of the Most High. Now, the river imagery in connection with the dwelling of God, of course, that spans the entire Scriptures. You start out with that in Genesis 1 and 2, where you have God's habitation in Eden, and what flows out of Eden?
Yeah.
Of course, a river flows out of Eden, and then it goes into its four different ways. And then that's picked up in Ezekiel chapter 47, where in this vision he has of the eschatological temple, there is just a trickle at first, right, coming from the side of the temple. And he follows it along, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And these waters finally are so deep that he has to get out of it. He'd have to swim if he stayed in it. And then this river is carrying the presence of God, the healing presence of God, so much so that when it reaches what the Bible calls the salt sea, we call it the Dead Sea, the Bible calls it the salt sea, that when it gets there, it heals the waters.
Yeah.
It desalinates them. So you go from Genesis to Ezekiel, and then, of course, to bring up Revelation again, you get to the end of Revelation, and here you have once more the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, just like Ezekiel saw, and there's a river.
Yeah.
The river of the water of life. And there's trees of life growing everywhere. Well, all of this, in connection with Psalm 46, is describing the same reality. Where God is, where the holy habitation of the Most High is, whether it's in Eden, or whether it's in the New Jerusalem, or whether it's in the temple that Ezekiel saw, or whether it is, in conformity with the theme of the conference, the church. There's water, there's a river, and it flows not just from the presence of God, but it carries God himself, his gifts, his healing, wherever it flows. And that makes glad the city of God, because that connects us through this saving liquid presence of God, which we would say is baptism. It connects us to Christ.
Yeah.
So it gives us that joy.
And the source of this river of life, if you go to John 4:14, where Jesus is talking to the one at the well, is Jesus himself.
Yeah. Yes.
He is the water of life.
Yep.
It flows from him.
And then John in Revelation picks up on that, because he says, there is no temple. And then he also says, well, there is a temple, except it's the Father and the Son.
Yeah.
Right? They are the temple. And so the water is flowing from them. And then if you really wanted to go crazy, you could go to later in John's gospel, of course, where you have the spear, Roman spear hitting the side, and what comes out? Water from the side of the temple. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. The temple is Christ's body. And all of a sudden, wow, you see Genesis and Ezekiel and Revelation all coming alive in this one image of a spear piercing the side of Jesus, and there comes the water of life out of him.
This is a lot of verses and a very long way of saying that there is a baptism that makes glad the city of God.
That's what digest for. That's what I said.
There is a baptism, the baptism, the only baptism, that, yes, makes glad the city of God. God is like, you're going to hear about this tonight if you come to my talk, which you are, of course. But God is really happy with baptism. He thinks it was a great idea. And so you should do that if you haven't, and do that to your kids too if you haven't. That would be a great idea.
Baptize them babies.
Baptize yo babies. Yes.
Anything else you want to say about verse 4?
Not 23 minutes in.
Yeah.
Hey, we're doing good. This is all planned and paced. It's good. What about this holy habitation of the Most High? What sets it apart? Oh, yeah, verse 5. Guess who's there? God. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. That's the same word that we had back in verse 2, where the mountains are moved into the heart of the sea. Mountains falling apart.
Long live the church.
Yes, long live the church. She shall not be moved. Now, this might be a bit unsettling when you look at the life of the church, because it does seem like the life of the church, from the life of our perspective, the church is moved quite frequently.
Yeah.
And not always in good directions. Yeah. Not always moving where we want the church to move. Yeah. But this is talking about the bride of Christ. This is talking about the reality of the one for whom Christ gave up his very life in order that she might be his own.
Yeah.
And so she shall not be moved. And not because the church is so strong and she's really got her act together and she understands the way things should be. No, it's all because of her connection to the bridegroom, to Christ himself.
I just, going back to this psalm being so influential to the writing of the Mighty Fortress, when you look at the imagery here, you can't help but think about that time period, and it must have felt like that for the beginning of the Reformation, like where literally the nations are raging, the kingdoms are tottering. I mean, everything seems to be completely spinning out of control, and yet God is faithful again to his church. The church must have looked like it was in great peril, and yet, ultimately, she was not moved.
Is it Chesterton who talks about how when the church feels like she's just gone and dead and in the grave, that's fine because she worships the Lord who knows his way out of the grave?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Everlasting man.
Yes,
Yes.
I love the imagery there, and it fits with this whole idea. Well, it's fine, so everything's falling apart. It's all right, because Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Feels like the church has just lost her ever-living mind. That's okay, because it turns out her bridegroom has not. And all our confidence is in him, and not in
The church literally cannot die.
No, it's an impossibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even the gates of Hades cannot withstand the attack of the church.
That's it.
Okay, so God's in her midst. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. I thought that's an interesting phrase, so I did a little search in the Hebrew on that. Turns out it only occurs in about 3 places in the Old Testament. Once here, once in the book of Judges, in one of those scenes that we don't even want to talk about. But the first occurrence is actually in Exodus 14, when Israel is trapped in the Red Sea. God has sent the wind to part the waters, and it says, when morning dawned, same Hebrew phrase. Then all of a sudden you see a way parted. For Israel, who's been trapped, probably scared to death, thought this is the end, all of a sudden, when morning dawns, God helps her.
It does feel like the psalmist, when writing this, is maybe meditating on that chapter of Exodus.
Yeah.
Because there's other places here where he uses very similar language to the narrative found in Exodus 14.
Yeah, I think he's probably reflecting upon the creation we talked about, those verses, but then also the Exodus, because this has that whole Exodus feel, especially with the sea and everything happening with it. God will help her morning dawn, so another Exodus kind of event. Then we switch. Okay, we talked about mountains, we talked about seas, and now we're going to bring in verse 6, the nations, the peoples, that are often symbolized by these turbulent waters. The nations, what do? Well, they rage. And again, that's the same verb in Hebrew as the waters roaring. The kingdoms totter. In other words, the kingdoms move. That's our same Hebrew word we've seen a couple times. The kingdoms move. The nations rage. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. God just simply speaks. That's all it is. When I read this, I was thinking of Jesus with his disciples on the boat. You know, you get the storm on the Sea of Galilee appropriately. And Jesus just basically stands up and says, "Shut up." And everything shuts up. He utters his voice, and there's calm. There's peace. Well, of course, he's the creator in the flesh. So his word carries that kind of power and authority.
Yeah, or when the soldiers come to arrest him, and he says it is I, and they,
they all fall backward.
It says I am, but
Yeah, they go with me.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
Down they go.
Nuance.
Yeah. And then we have in verse 7. I'm still moving. Dan's like looking at the time.
No, I'm good.
We're good. All right, we're getting there.
I'm saving it.
Oh, you got.
No, I don't.
Okay. So verse 7 and verse 11 are the same. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Now, there's like all kinds of good stuff in here. First of all, in Hebrew, the Lord of hosts is Yahweh Sabaoth, which is usually translated either Lord of hosts or Lord of armies. It's a military imagery here. In the Septuagint, in the Greek translation, it was translated consistently as Pantokrator, which, if any of you know the Orthodox tradition, that's the major icon that you will see. It's usually the upper half of Jesus' body, See, is it his left hand he's holding the New Testament and his right hand is raised in blessing? That's the Pantocrator, which means like the Lord of all. Now, what Luther did with this in the Mighty Fortress is perfect. So here we have the Lord of Hosts. Well, who is this? Who is the Lord of Hosts? Let's see. Who might that be? Well, you get to, I don't know if it stands at 2 or 3 in a Mighty Fortress, but it goes, with the might of ours cannot be done, soon were our loss effected. But for us fights the valiant one whom God himself elected. Ask ye, who is this? Jesus Christ. It is. Who? Of Sabaoth, Lord. Lord of Sabaoth.
Yeah.
So who's the Lord of Sabaoth that we're singing about in the Mighty Fortress? Jesus Christ it is. The elect one of God, the one who is on the battlefield for us. This is, I mean, it's all over, of course, Luther's writings. It's all over that podcast, 40 Minutes in the Old Testament, too. Where it turns out that the Lord of hosts who's with us is none other than Jesus Christ. Yeah, he is. He's Yahweh Sabaoth. He's the one who's with us always. And the with us in Hebrew is the same part of the Hebrew expression Emmanuel. So he's with us, God. So you kind of have both here. Jesus Christ is Yahweh Sabaoth. He's the Lord of hosts, and he's Emmanuel. He's with us. And then you have the second line, which is kind of surprising. It's not what I would have expected the second line of this verse to read. Maybe something like, I don't know, God Almighty is behind us or whatever. But it says the God of Jacob is our fortress. That occurs, I think, my notes here, I can check it. About 30 times in the Old Testament, he's referred to as the God of Jacob. And I was sitting there just kind of thinking over that. And I thought, oh, this is actually perfect. Because when you think about the Lord of hosts, Yahweh Sabaoth, I think in terms of power, right?
Yeah.
Might. He's omnipotent. And then you switch and you think of the God of that scheming, backstabbing, no good, unlikable patriarch Jacob. The God of Jacob, the God of that guy who's so much like all of us. He's our fortress. Yeah. So you have omnipotence in the Lord of hosts, and then you have something like omni-love, omni-agape in the God of Jacob. He's both. He's all-powerful, which is great. I mean, having an all-powerful God, that's awesome. Doesn't do you any good if he doesn't care about you.
Yeah.
But the fact that he actually cares about you, that he, to kind of piggyback off what Kelsey and Flame were just talking about, he elected you in Christ. He chose Jacob. That's great news.
Yeah.
He's our grace-filled fortress.
Well, you got to pick a patriarch that really needs a fortress.
Right.
You can't be like the God of Samson is our fortress. You'd be like, well,
yeah.
Did he really need one?
Right. Yeah. We got 8 minutes. We got plenty of time, people.
Yes.
Don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. Come, he says, behold the works of the Lord who has brought desolations on the earth. Okay, what has he done? Well, he makes wars to take a Sabbath. The word cease there is Shabbat, which is the verb from whence we get our noun Sabbath. So he makes wars take a Sabbath. Stop, cease. To the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters a spear, and he burns the chariots with fire.
Again, Revelation imagery, this, beating your swords into plowshares kind of thing. I mean, this is both an already and not yet reality. Mm-hmm. When we're thinking about how God interacts in the world and what he ultimately will do in creating the city of God for his people in the last days.
Yeah, and it picks up on the imagery, too, of Isaiah 2, where you have the mountain of the house of the Lord being established as the chief of the mountains, and all the peoples, all the nations are going to stream in this anti-gravitational sort of way. They're going to stream upward to it.
Yeah.
And they'll say, come, let us learn of the Torah of the Lord. And they're going to do what? They're going to beat their swords into plowshares, and their They're spears into pruning hooks. They're going to transform weapons of warfare into implements of agriculture. This transition back to this Eden kind of life. So all of these characteristics of violence and fallenness in the world and bloodshed and all of that, they're going to be broken, shattered, burned, because a time of peace has come. This time of peace that's established ultimately by Christ himself being broken and shattered and becoming the one who actually is receiving the weapons, receiving that which is violence done to his own person in order that he can bring about this kingdom of peace.
Well, it is weird too, because if you're talking about all that and you're like, wait a minute, I thought I was beholding desolations. You have, come, let's check out these works of the Lord. Look at all this desolation on the earth, and you're like, okay, and then you're like, oh, this is a wonderful thing here. We're going to have peace and all stuff. But the truth is that before you get, peace on earth and all the wars cease, the way this does end is like it's all got to be burned up. Yeah. All right. So what you're really hoping for is like, all right, come nuke it all and then recreate it, right? So you have the new heavens and the new earth are followed by the desolation of the earth. But this is the wonderful thing. Like when that happens, something really great is about to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there is no resurrection without death, right? So there is no new creation without the destruction of the old. This is the way our Lord works.
Yeah.
Now we get to the verse everybody knows, right? Be still and know that I am God. Now here's something kind of cool about this verse. You can have two different addressees of this verse. You can either have, and this is typically the way that it's preached and taught, and I've done this myself, where God is talking to us, right? Chill. Mm-hmm. That's the new Chad translation. Chill. It's the idea is drop it, right? Relax, be still, stop, whatever you're doing, it's okay. Just relax, be still. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that is God's address to us. Quit doing so much. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Quit trying to raise your hands and fix your situation, because you're probably just going to mess it up even worse. So just be still, stop. Like at the Red Sea when God tells Moses, who's not even talking, by the way, he's like, hush.
Yeah.
I got this. Why are you still talking? So that's one possibility, and it works. The other possibility, actually, and I kind of like this too, is that God is addressing the nations. He's like, shut up, stop, be still, and know that I am God. You nations, not just Israel, but you nations. So, both of these are true, right? God is talking to us, but he's also talking about the world. Be still, drop it, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. And then it wraps up with the final repetition of what we saw in verse 7. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress.
Going back to that Exodus 14 passage, one of the reasons I feel like the psalmist could be meditating on it is because the language is so similar here, especially with being still. The people are brought to the edge of the Red Sea. The Egyptians are catching up on them. They're obviously and understandably terrified. They can't see a way through. They can't see a way out. And yet God speaks through Moses to the people and says, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. And then it ends with this word, the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent.
What a great lesson for the church to learn too. Yeah. Just preach the gospel.
I feel like we got that one knocked. Yeah. We're good. Yeah.
Just preach the gospel and let God do his work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quit trying to do God's job for him. First of all, you're not qualified. Secondly, you'll mess it up even if you try. Mm-hmm. Just do what he's giving you to do, and the result will be what Psalm 46 is talking about. Where there's fear, there's going to be tranquility and peace. Where there's chaos all around, there's going to be assurance that God is our fortress. He's our refuge. He's our strength. And so we can drop it. We can be still and know that we're not God. He is. Yeah. And because of that, then we know that he's with us. We know that he's always going to be our mighty fortress.
Yeah. Well, this psalm is bookended with two things. Well, the psalmist starts by saying, hey, just remember, in times of trouble, you have this well-proven refuge and strength. Like you have God, and at the end, God says, "That's right, I am. So stop it." That's how it goes.
Yeah.
He said, "You can be still. Just stop trying to help me save you." And that's how it starts, and that's how it ends, and that's how we end, because we are out of time. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Stinky Fellows is going to be up next, so no one go anywhere. Thank you very much.